Sam Elliott is a legend whose voice and presence have defined generations of Westerns. Yet behind that calm, rugged exterior lies a reputation for blunt honesty so sharp it has unsettled some of Hollywood's biggest stars. He once confronted a rising star and a celebrated director, igniting debates that rippled all the way through awards season. Some call him outspoken, others call him impossible. Which Hollywood giants have found themselves on the receiving end of Sam Elliott's harsh words? You'd be shocked to find out the names on this list. The rise of Sam Elliott. When people think of Hollywood legends, Sam Elliott is one of those names that comes to mind. But Sam isn't just famous for his rugged look, his deep voice, or his long, iconic mustache. He's also one of the last true cowboy figures in film and television. A man who somehow managed to keep the old-school Western spirit alive while moving effortlessly into modern roles. Yet behind that calm, steady presence is a man who has never been afraid to speak his mind. Over the decades, that honesty has earned him respect from audiences, but it's also made him a controversial figure in Hollywood. He has walked away from friendships, clashed with colleagues, and developed a reputation for being brutally straightforward in an industry built on politeness and politics. Sam Elliott was born on August 9, 1944, in Sacramento, California. But unlike many Hollywood legends, he didn't spend his childhood in the heart of the entertainment industry. Instead, he was raised in Portland, Oregon, a place far removed from the glamour of Los Angeles. It was there that he first developed an interest in performance. Elliott attended David Douglas High School and later studied at Clark College in Vancouver, Washington, where he pursued theater. Even in those early days, he had the looks, the voice, and the presence of a leading man. However, he was also weighed down by something very personal: his father's disapproval. His father, Henry Elliott, worked in the construction industry and had a very practical outlook on life. He believed acting wasn't a real career, and he made his doubts clear to his son. He said to Sam, "You've got a snowball's chance in hell of having a career in Hollywood." This disapproval left scars, and Sam has spoken about how much it hurt him, how deeply it shook his confidence, and how those words echoed in his mind as he struggled to make a living later on. To make matters worse, tragedy struck when Sam was just 18 years old. His father died of a heart attack, leaving behind not only grief, but also unfinished conversations and unresolved tension that marked him in ways that never fully went away. With his family life fractured, Elliott threw himself into trying to make it as an actor. It wasn't glamorous. He took on odd jobs, worked construction, and fought through financial hardship just to stay afloat. Hollywood in the late 1960s wasn't kind to newcomers, especially ones who didn't come from influential families. Yet Elliott kept at it. He had been told no countless times, but he refused to give up. His persistence eventually paid off when he landed his first film role in The Way West in 1967. Not long after, he appeared in a small but memorable part in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969. Though the role was minor, sharing a set with stars like Paul Newman and Robert Redford gave him both the experience and motivation he needed to keep going. But his real breakthrough came several years later in Lifeguard, where he played a man caught between responsibility and personal freedom. Audiences immediately connected with his understated performance, and although it wasn't a massive blockbuster, it put him on the map and showed the industry what he could do. From there, the roles grew bigger, and so did his reputation. He became the tough, reliable presence in films where grit mattered more than flash. Throughout his career, Sam has always been one to choose honesty, even when it cost him. And while he is respected for his authenticity, it's no secret that his words have created distance between himself and other actors. Some admire him for it, others resent him. Over time, Elliott's blunt words turned into public criticisms that shook Hollywood and left lasting marks on his reputation. Benedict Cumberbatch. When Benedict Cumberbatch signed on to play Phil Burbank in The Power of the Dog in 2021, he probably didn't expect to ignite one of the most heated Hollywood debates in years. The film, directed by Jane Campion, was a slow-burning Western set in 1920s Montana. where Cumberbatch played a rancher who outwardly embodied toughness and cruelty, yet inwardly struggled with repressed desires and vulnerabilities. Critics hailed the performance as one of the most powerful of his career, earning him an Academy Award nomination. But not everyone was impressed. In fact, one of the film industry's most famous cowboy figures, Sam Elliott, was openly appalled by what he saw, and he made sure the world knew it. Elliott had spent decades building his career around the Western archetype. To him, cowboys were symbols of rugged masculinity, hard work, and a kind of stoic independence. When The Power of the Dog arrived, it challenged that very image. Instead of the straightforward, traditional cowboy, the story delved into the hidden pain and complexities beneath the surface, including themes of gender roles and repression. Elliott did not take kindly to that reinterpretation. During a 2022 appearance on Marc Maron's podcast, he went on a fiery rant, harshly criticizing the movie and dismissing it in very blunt terms. His language was so blunt that headlines across the internet lit up immediately. He mocked the way the characters were portrayed, dismissing their cowboy image as looking more like a group of Chippendales dancers than authentic ranch hands. More controversially, he took aim at the film's allusions to homosexuality, saying it didn't align with his understanding of the Western tradition. "I'm in Hollywood, where public criticism between actors is usually hidden behind carefully chosen words, but Elliott's attack felt like an explosion. This wasn't vague disapproval. This was direct, unfiltered anger, aimed not only at the film, but also at Benedict Cumberbatch himself. He questioned why an English actor had been cast in such a quintessentially American role, hinting that Cumberbatch couldn't possibly understand or embody the authenticity of a rancher from Montana. Coming from someone so closely tied to Westerns, these words carried weight, but they also carried a sting that quickly turned into controversy. Cumberbatch, for his part, didn't lash out in return. Instead, when asked about Elliott's comments during an interview at the BAFTA Film Awards, he simply called the reaction very odd. He went on to defend the film with calm and clarity, explaining that its purpose was to peel back layers of masculinity and show how repression can twist people into cruelty. He stressed that it was a story about the human condition, about what happens when society forces individuals to bury their true selves. His measured response stood in sharp contrast to Elliott's fiery outburst, and it only deepened the conversation. The fallout from Elliott's criticism was immediate. On social media, fans and critics clashed. Some agreed with Elliott, arguing that Westerns should stick to their roots and not be reshaped by modern interpretations. However, others sided with Cumberbatch, praising the film for its bravery and complexity, and accusing Elliott of being stuck in outdated ideas of masculinity. What might have been just another award season debate suddenly became a much larger cultural conversation about toxic masculinity, representation, and the evolution of the cowboy image in American storytelling. The uproar grew so loud that Elliott eventually felt compelled to walk back his words. Weeks later, he issued a public apology, acknowledging that his comments were disrespectful and unfair. He admitted that he had let his emotions get the better of him, and that he had tremendous respect for Benedict Cumberbatch as an actor. It was rare for Elliott, a man known for never backing down, to retract his statements, and that alone showed how heated the controversy had become. Still, the damage had been done to their relationship, and the clash revealed just how differently generations of actors view the Western genre. For Elliott, it was sacred ground, a way of life that represented strength and tradition. For Cumberbatch and Campion, it was a canvas to explore deeper truths, even if those truths challenged old ideals. And while Benedict Cumberbatch handled the criticism with grace, the exchange left a mark on Elliott's reputation. He wasn't just the legendary cowboy with the gravelly voice anymore. He was also the man who ignited one of the most public Hollywood feuds in recent memory. Yet in Elliott's mind, he had only done what he always does, and that's speak honestly, no matter the cost. That honesty, however, didn't just put him at odds with actors. It also set him against some directors, including the very person who directed The Power of the Dog, Jane Campion. If Benedict Cumberbatch felt the sting of Sam Elliott's words, the person who faced the sharpest edge of his criticism was none other than the director of The Power of the Dog herself, Jane Campion. By the time Elliott made his comments, Campion had already cemented her place in cinema history. She was the first woman ever to win the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and in 2022, she became only the third woman to win the Academy Award for Best Director. Her vision in The Power of the Dog turned a quiet western into one of the most discussed films of the decade, praised for its depth, artistry, and psychological tension. Yet to Elliott, none of that seemed to matter. What bothered him most wasn't just the story or the performances, but the fact that a New Zealander had dared to reimagine the mythology of the American West. Elliott dismissed her authority to tell such a story, questioning why someone from outside the United States should be allowed to define one of its most iconic cultural landscapes. In his view, the setting, tone, and atmosphere of the film felt alien to the tradition of westerns he had spent his career living and breathing. To him, the dusty plains and ranches of Montana weren't just a backdrop. They were a way of life that only an insider could authentically portray. His frustration spilled into comments that struck many as less about filmmaking and more about who he believed had the right to tell an American story. Campion did not stay silent. Known for her sharp wit and unapologetic confidence, she fired back in public with remarks that quickly went viral. Without mincing words, she suggested that Elliott's critique wasn't simply about creative differences, but reflected something much deeper. She accused him of hitting what she called the trifecta of prejudice: misogyny, xenophobia, and homophobia. And in the same breath, she dismissed his complaints with humor, joking that if he wanted a real showdown, she could arrange one at Warner Brothers between him and Doctor Strange, referring to Benedict Cumberbatch. It was a clever jab, but also a reminder that Elliott's attack had, in a way, boosted the visibility of her film even further. The timing of Campion's response was crucial. The Power of the Dog was in the middle of awards season, already considered a frontrunner for major honors. Elliott's fiery criticism could have cast a shadow over it, but instead, Campion's quick and pointed defense turned the controversy into a rallying point. Audiences, critics, and industry insiders largely sided with her, praising her for standing her ground and exposing the outdated assumptions behind Elliott's words. What could have been a distraction ended up reinforcing the cultural importance of her film and sharpening the conversations around it. For Elliott, however, the damage was twofold. Not only did he spark a feud with an Oscar-winning director, but his comments also painted him as out of step with the times. To some, he came across as a man holding on to a version of Hollywood that no longer existed, a defender of an image that had already begun to evolve. And although his later apologies softened the blow, the memory of his outburst remained, and the exchange with Campion became one of the defining moments of his late career narrative. Yet Jane Campion wasn't the only filmmaker whose vision of the West collided with Elliott's. He also clashed with another man who dedicated much of his career to keeping the Western alive through sweeping epics and television sagas: Kevin Costner. Few modern actors have done more to keep the Western alive than Kevin Costner. From Dances with Wolves in 1990, which won him both the Academy Award for Best Picture and Best Director, to his starring role in Yellowstone, Costner has built a reputation as the face of the contemporary cowboy. His work often blends classic Western values with modern themes, showing that the genre still has a place in the 21st century. Yet even with all his achievements, Costner has not escaped the sharp tongue of Sam Elliott. When Yellowstone premiered in 2018, it quickly became one of the most talked about shows on television. Created by Taylor Sheridan, the drama about the Dutton family and their sprawling Montana ranch struck a chord with audiences who craved sweeping landscapes, family conflict, and modern-day frontier politics. Costner's performance as patriarch John Dutton was central to the show's appeal, and it cemented him as a leading figure in the revival of the Western. But Elliott was never a fan. In one interview, he dismissed Yellowstone with a single cutting remark, comparing it to an old primetime soap like Dallas. The implication was clear. To Elliott, This modern Western that Costner had starred in was more about drama and spectacle than authenticity. But this wasn't just casual criticism. In fact, Sheridan had actually offered Elliott a role in Yellowstone, and Elliott had turned it down. Although he later admitted that it wasn't about Kevin Costner personally, the damage had been done, and Costner reportedly didn't approve of Elliott's remarks. The problem was that Elliott couldn't reconcile his own vision of the West with what Yellowstone represented. For Elliott, the show leaned too heavily on soap-style twists and glossy family intrigue, which clashed with his belief in a grittier, more grounded portrayal of the frontier spirit. Rumors began to circulate that his blunt dismissal of the show created a quiet strain between him and Costner. Hollywood insiders whispered about tension, noting that speaking down on such a wildly successful series, which had made Costner more relevant than ever, was bound to ruffle feathers. Costner never fired back, but Elliott's remarks cast a shadow on the ongoing debate about what the Western should be in the modern age. Interestingly, Elliott didn't reject Sheridan entirely. He later agreed to star in 1883, the prequel to Yellowstone that delved into the brutal realities of 19th-century frontier life. Elliott played Shea Brennan, a hardened guide leading settlers across dangerous terrain, and his performance was widely praised for its emotional weight and authenticity. By embracing 1883 while rejecting Yellowstone, Elliott drew a line in the sand, making it clear that Westerns worked best when they showed the raw struggle for survival, not the soap opera of wealthy ranchers fighting for power. That choice revealed something essential about Elliott's identity as an actor. He had slowly positioned himself as a guardian of tradition, someone unwilling to bend to trends if they stray too far from the roots of the genre. Still, Yellowstone wasn't the only project that put Elliott at odds with other stars. Away from the world of cowboys and ranches, he crossed paths with an actor whose eccentric style and unpredictable choices could not have been further from his own: Jared Leto. In Hollywood, few actors have sparked as much debate about acting methods as Jared Leto. Over the years, he has developed a reputation for throwing himself into roles with a level of intensity that often crosses into the extreme. For one role, he lived on the streets to understand homelessness. For another, he dramatically gained and lost weight to physically transform his body. And during his controversial turn as the Joker, he reportedly sent strange gifts to his co-stars, including items that left many people unsettled. To his supporters, this dedication showed his commitment to authenticity. However, to his critics, it came across as excessive, unnecessary, and even disruptive. Sam Elliott falls firmly in the second camp. While the two have never worked directly together, Elliott has been openly skeptical of what he calls over-the-top performances, a phrase that clearly echoes the kind of extreme tactics Leto is known for. Elliott's own approach to acting has always been the opposite. He values restraint, subtlety, and a kind of lived-in realism that doesn't rely on theatrics. His characters feel authentic because Elliott himself embodies them with quiet strength and emotional honesty, not because he radically alters his lifestyle off-screen. That contrast highlights just how wide the gap has grown between generations of actors. Elliott has made it clear that authenticity is about understanding a role from the inside without needing to blur the line between performance and personal life. But to Leto, authenticity seems to demand total immersion, even if it means making the people around him uncomfortable. The difference between these approaches says as much about Hollywood as it does about the two men. Younger actors often praise Leto for his fearlessness, while veterans like Elliott see it as self-indulgent. The divide reflects a larger shift in the industry, where some believe bold transformations are the ultimate proof of talent, while others argue that great acting comes from control and restraint. And while Elliott rarely calls out individuals by name, the shadow of Jared Leto hovers over his criticisms. To many, it seems obvious who he has in mind when he condemns performances that feel more like stunts than storytelling. This quiet disapproval reinforces Elliott's role as a traditionalist, someone who believes acting should serve the story rather than overshadow it. His philosophy may not always align with Hollywood's appetite for spectacle, but it explains why he has endured for so long while others burn brightly and then fade. Interestingly, the clash of philosophies wasn't limited to Leto's generation. Even on the set of The Power of the Dog, Elliott's view of acting came up against the style of a much younger co-star, whose breakout performance challenged his ideas of what a Western could be. Kodi Smit-McPhee. When The Power of the Dog premiered, much of the attention naturally focused on Benedict Cumberbatch's performance and Jane Campion's direction. Yet one of the most remarkable elements of the film was the breakout role of Kodi Smit-McPhee as Peter, the quiet, almost fragile young man who slowly reveals hidden strength and intelligence. Smit-McPhee brought a delicacy and nuance that captivated audiences. His performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor and placed him firmly on Hollywood's radar as a new kind of leading man. However, Sam Elliott's harsh remarks about the film inevitably cast a shadow over all involved, and that included Smit-McPhee. Even though Elliott never targeted him directly, the criticism of the story and its themes touched on the very essence of the character Smit-McPhee had brought to life. Peter was written as a challenge to the traditional cowboy image, slender, sensitive, and observant rather than physically imposing. He represented a new lens through which to view masculinity in the Western landscape. Elliott's anger at the film's approach to that landscape was, in many ways, anger at what Peter represented. When asked about the controversy, Smit-McPhee's response could not have been more different from Elliott's fiery critique. He didn't lash out or defend himself with elaborate arguments. Instead, he offered a calm and measured reaction, explaining that he chose not to give his energy to negativity and preferred to remain focused on his work. It was a short response, but it spoke volumes. And while Smit-McPhee's poise showed a generational shift in how young actors handle public criticism, some rumors began to spread about Elliott not appreciating younger actors who stood up to him. Smit-McPhee's calmness was not just a media strategy, but also a reflection of his approach to his craft. He has always been known for his thoughtful performances, from The Road to Let Me In, and his ability to bring quiet intensity to the screen. And so, rather than trying to match Elliott's bluntness, he embodied the same understated qualities that made his portrayal of Peter so powerful, demonstrating that strength can come from restraint and dignity can come from not being drawn into battles that don't serve the work itself. The controversy surrounding the film may have given Smit-McPhee even more credibility, because he proved that he could carry himself with maturity in the middle of a storm that had nothing to do with his own words or actions. His performance stood on its own, and his composure in the aftermath only reinforced that he was not just a talented actor, but a professional who understood how to navigate the changing tides of Hollywood. And while this moment once again revealed Elliott's distance from younger stars, it wasn't the only time he found himself at odds with actors who challenged his worldview. Nicolas Cage. Few actors in Hollywood have a reputation as wild and unpredictable as Nicolas Cage. Over the years, he has become famous for what many call mega acting, a style that thrives on extremes. Cage has built a career by taking bold risks, diving into emotional outbursts, eccentric line deliveries, and performances that swing from the deeply moving to the outright bizarre. Sam Elliott, on the other hand, has always stood at the opposite end of that spectrum. His style is restrained, rooted in stillness, and defined by subtle emotion rather than theatrics. In fact, he has often spoken about his dislike of exaggerated performances, calling them distracting and untrue to the character. And this perspective placed him at odds, at least philosophically, with Cage's larger-than-life approach. The two actually crossed paths on screen in Ghost Rider, where Elliott played the mysterious caretaker alongside Cage's over-the-top portrayal of Johnny Blaze. The film itself was filled with spectacle, blending comic book fantasy with supernatural elements, and Cage leaned heavily into his trademark intensity. Elliott, by contrast, delivered a grounded performance that gave the story its sense of gravitas. However, their scenes together, highlighted just how different their methods were. Cage burned brightly with flamboyance, while Elliott anchored the film with quiet weight. After filming wrapped up, rumors began to spread about Elliott's disapproval of Cage's acting style. Although Elliott never publicly singles Cage out directly, his general disdain for exaggerated acting left many Hollywood insiders and fans drawing connections. Whenever he dismissed performances that valued spectacle over authenticity, audiences couldn't help but think of Cage and his long history of wild roles. Elliott has always resisted trends that turn acting into performance art, preferring instead to lose himself in characters without drawing attention to the craft itself. Elliott insists that the job of an actor is not to shock or dazzle, but to inhabit a role so naturally that the audience forgets they are watching someone perform. Cage's method, in contrast, thrives on reminding the audience that something extraordinary is happening in front of them. Both approaches have their fans, but they are so far apart that the two men almost feel like they come from different worlds of cinema. But Nicolas Cage was not the only actor whose style clashed with Elliott's ideals. Another star, one who came from a very different background in television sitcoms and later tried to reinvent himself in Hollywood dramas, also found himself brushed aside by Elliott's sharp honesty. Ashton Kutcher. In 2016, Sam Elliott joined Ashton Kutcher in The Ranch, a Netflix series that ran for 4 seasons and blended comedy with heartfelt family drama. On screen, their chemistry worked. Elliott played the gruff, old-school father, while Kutcher embodied the younger generation trying to find his way. It looked like a classic pairing of two different eras in Hollywood, one grounded in traditional grit and the other in a lighter, modern style. In fact, Kutcher often went out of his way to praise Elliott, even calling him the best in interviews, which made headlines for how genuine the admiration seemed. However, Elliott rarely responded in kind, keeping to his usual silence. This quietness sparked rumors of a behind-the-scenes chill, fueled further by the obvious generational and stylistic differences between the two actors. Kutcher came up in the world of broad comedy and fast-talking charm, while Elliott built his career on stillness and authority. The contrast was clear in nearly every scene they shared. The tension grew when controversy hit the show. Kutcher, as both star and producer, had to navigate the exit of co-star Danny Masterson after allegations against him came to light. Elliott never commented publicly, staying completely removed from the noise, and some insiders speculated that this silence created distance between him and Kutcher, who was forced to deal with the fallout directly. The reports further fueled the idea that Elliott simply didn't mesh with Kutcher's way of handling Hollywood business. But what remained undeniable was Elliott's consistency. He brought the same stoic professionalism to The Ranch that he had carried throughout his career, even when surrounded by actors whose methods or reputations clashed with his own. Kutcher may have admired him, and Elliott may have respected the work enough to stay, but their partnership ultimately highlighted the gap between two very different schools of acting, one rooted in tradition, the other in modern celebrity. What do you think? Who else in Hollywood has found themselves at odds with Sam Elliott? Tell us in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.